The neighbor tells me she did not know Merseana Struggs for very long, but she says she was beautiful and kind. She says the moment she heard gunshots, she feared for her friend's life.
That's my bitch. That's my bitch, bro. That's my bitch.
On July 19th, 2024, in the city of Houston, Texas, a young mother named Merseana Struggs, only 29 years old, tried to outrun the danger that had been growing around her. She had seen glimpses of it before, in the controlling demands, the threats, the rising pressure. But on that summer afternoon, the red flags that had gone unheeded finally bled into catastrophe. A neighbor, Shawnee Drury, would later describe what she saw.
And he needed her to bring the insurance card. And so my roommate took her to go down there, and he wasn't there. So when they came back, he was sitting right here in her car. And she jumped out and had a confrontation with him. And he shot her a couple times. My boyfriend pushed me back in the house, and we just went in the bathroom, and I just had my hands over my head, and it was so loud. I thought he was coming in the house because he kept saying he was going to kill everybody in the house. He was going to kill us for helping her.
A young woman sprinting for her life. Her feet pounded the pavement, her body bent forward with desperation, her eyes fixed on the hope of escape. She wasn't running to the store or jogging through the neighborhood. She was running from death itself. She was running from the man who had promised to love her, but instead came armed with the intent to kill. Welcome to True Crime Red Flag Channel, where we look beyond the headlines and into the patterns that lead to tragedy. We examine the warning signs that so many people ignore until it's too late. We don't just tell stories of crime. We reveal the patterns of red flags that could save lives if only they were recognized in time. Subscribe today to gain the knowledge that could protect you or someone you love. And if you've survived domestic violence, share your story in the comments, how you recognize the danger and how you get out safely. Your words could save someone else's life. To understand the weight of this case, you have to step away from the crime scene and see the woman at its center, not just in the moment of tragedy, but in the life she lived before. Because Merseana Struggs was not defined by the way her life ended. She was defined by the way she lived, the people she loved, and the future she was building. Merseana was 29 years old when she was killed. She had grown up in New Orleans, Louisiana, a city that remained part of her identity and her family's home base. After her death, her sister, Kimani Struggs, organized a fundraiser to help bring her body back home for cremation and to support her surviving child. Within her family, Merseana was more than just another face. She was a daughter who carried her parents' hopes forward. She was a sister, bonded closely to her sibling. She had a son, just 8 years old, who depended on her. Every choice she made, every hour of work, every sacrifice, every moment of determination circled back to him. She wanted him to have stability. She wanted him to grow up with opportunities. She wanted him to feel secure in ways she herself may not always have felt. In that role, she wasn't just a thespian. That determination brought her to Houston, Texas. It was not a move of chance. It was a move of intention. Merseana had just moved to Houston, seeking a better life for herself and her child. She was willing to start over. She was willing to leave behind the familiarity of New Orleans and step into a new city because she believed it might open the door to something better. Like so many young women raising children on their own, Merseana faced obstacles. Bills, responsibilities, the day-to-day pressures of survival weighed on her. But what stands out in her story is how she responded. She sought independence. She found ways to support herself. She created her own income. She took steps to avoid being entirely dependent on anyone else. That independence was not about luxury or indulgence. It was about survival. It was about dignity. It was about being able to provide for her son without relying on handouts or submission. In every dollar she earned, in every decision she made to hold on to her income, she was asserting her autonomy. But independence can spark conflict, especially in relationships where one partner seeks control. For Merseana, that conflict came in the form of her boyfriend, Nicholas Finley, 34 years old. He pressured her over her earnings. He demanded access to what she worked for. He wanted a share of the income she had built for herself and her child. To understand how the story reached its breaking point, you have to see who he was, how he lived, and the ways he pulled her into a cycle of coercion that escalated one red flag at a time. Nicholas Finley was not a stranger to pressure or confrontation. Those who crossed his path often saw the surface, a man who could present himself as charming, persuasive, maybe even dependable in flashes. But beneath that surface was a pattern familiar to anyone who studies abusive relationships. He carried a sense of entitlement, a belief that what belonged to others could just as easily belong to him. He was a man who saw independence not as strength, but as defiance. And when independence came from a woman he claimed as his partner, it became something he could not tolerate. For Finley, relationships were not built on equality. They were built on control. At first, that control may have looked like ordinary closeness, like sharing space, like leaning on one another. But soon the boundaries blurred. What was hers became his to demand. What she earned became his to claim. And in this entitlement, the red flags began to rise. The first warning sign was financial coercion. For many abusers, money becomes the easiest lever of power. If you can control the money, you can control the person. Experts estimate that in 99% of abusive relationships, financial abuse plays a role. It is one of the most common, yet least visible forms of control. For Merseana, this abuse came in the form of Finley's demands for her earnings. She had worked to build her independence, creating her own income to support herself and her child, but Finley insisted on having a share of it. This wasn't about partnership or shared responsibility. It was about entitlement. In his mind, her refusal to give him money wasn't just a disagreement. It was a direct challenge to his control. Imagine what that does to someone like Merseana. Each paycheck, each dollar earned, each small victory of independence became another source of conflict. What should have been hers, to pay rent, to buy groceries, to raise her son, became a battleground. And every time she said no, she wasn't just protecting her income. She was risking his anger. This was the first red flag, and it was one of the clearest. But financial control wasn't enough. Finley also took control of her car. For most people, a car is just transportation. For a mother like Merseana, it was much more. It was the key to survival, to get to work, to take her son to school, to buy groceries, to leave if things became unsafe. Abusers know this. They know that if they can control mobility, they can shrink a partner's world. Finley used her car whenever he wanted. He drove it as if it were his own. And when financial and mobility control weren't enough, Finley turned to escalating threats. This is the stage of abuse that experts warn about most urgently. When a victim resists control, abusers often raise the stakes. What begins as an argument becomes intimidation. What begins as intimidation becomes threats. And when threats are made, the risk of lethal violence skyrockets. In Merseana's case, the escalation was chilling. Neighbors recalled hearing him threaten to kill everyone in the house. For Merseana, those threats meant she was no longer just fighting for independence. She was fighting for safety, moment to moment. Each argument, each refusal, carried the possibility of eruption. And once threats have been spoken aloud, silence doesn't erase them. They linger, shaping behavior, forcing compliance, wrapping fear around every choice. This created an environment of intimidation. Abuse is not always about visible scars. Sometimes it is about living in a constant state of fear. Raised voices, slamming doors, angry stares, a partner's presence that feels like a storm cloud overhead. For Merseana, intimidation was not occasional. It was constant. At the core of all of this was entitlement. Finley's behavior was not random. It was consistent with the belief that he was owed her money, her car, her compliance. Entitlement transforms love into ownership. It reframes partnership into possession. When entitlement governs a relationship, every act of independence becomes rebellion. Every no becomes a provocation. That is how Finley saw Merseana. Not as a woman with her own life and responsibilities, but as someone whose independence diminished his control. And to him, that was unacceptable. These red flags, one after another, formed a chain. Financial coercion, control of her car, escalating threats, intimidation, entitlement. Each one alone is dangerous. Together, they create the conditions for catastrophe. On July 19, 2024, Finley called Merseana and claimed he had been pulled over by police while driving her car. He said he needed her to bring the insurance card. At first, it sounded routine. Many people have been stopped by police and needed paperwork from home. But this was no ordinary request. It was a trap. There had been no traffic stop. Finley had not been pulled over. He was using the story as bait to lure her into meeting him at a location of his choosing. Merseana agreed. She was trying to do what was asked of her, likely thinking this was nothing more than an inconvenience. She grabbed the insurance card and went to meet him, unaware that she was stepping directly into a carefully staged trap. When she arrived, she found Finley waiting. The story about the traffic stop collapsed immediately. He had been inside her car and he wasn't looking for insurance papers. What he wanted was confrontation. The argument began. Voices rose in the parking lot of the park at Cumberland Apartments. What started as words quickly escalated into something darker, something that carried the tension of a relationship already worn down by control, financial disputes, and threats. As the argument escalated, Finley pulled out a gun and then came the moment of realization for Merseana. This wasn't just another argument. This was danger. She broke from him and ran. Her feet pounded across the hot Houston pavement, every step fueled by survival. She sprinted toward a nearby truck, hoping to use it as cover or maybe get inside. She grabbed the handle. It was locked. In that second, her chance of escape slipped away. She turned, still trying to flee, but Finley was behind her with a gun. From inside one of the apartments, Shawnee Drury, a neighbor, heard the chaos. She had been brought there by her roommate at Finley's request, already sensing that something wasn't right. As the shouting turned into screams, she retreated into the bathroom, hiding, listening. She pressed herself against the closed door, paralyzed by fear. She later described the moment as feeling like he was going to kill everyone inside the home. Outside, Finley raised the gun and fired. The first shot cracked through the humid air, echoing off the walls of the complex. Then another, then another. Witnesses counted as many as 8 shots. Merseana stumbled forward, her body collapsing near the truck. Her hands, which had reached for safety only seconds earlier, now slid across the pavement as she fell. Her cries silenced, her body went still. From inside her hiding place, Shawnee held her breath. The sound of each shot burned into her memory. The moment felt endless, the kind of moment when every second expands, stretching into terror. Finley did not stop after pulling the trigger. He stood over her. He pulled her purse from the ground. Then he took her car, the same one he had claimed earlier he was pulled over in. He left her behind, bleeding on the pavement, and drove away. The gunshots had already drawn attention. Neighbors peered out from windows, some screaming, some frozen. Calls to 911 flooded in. Dispatchers sent police and EMS racing to the scene. When first responders arrived, the apartment complex was already wrapped in shock. Officers rushed to the area where she had collapsed. Shell casings littered the ground, marking the trail of violence. The truck she had tried to reach stood locked and silent. An EMT knelt beside her. They checked for a pulse. Nothing. The words were spoken quickly and clinically. Female victim, gunshot wounds, no signs of life, but the weight of them hung in the air. A sheet was pulled over her body, the fabric moving softly in the hot summer air. Police secured the scene. Yellow tape stretched across the lot, a thin barrier between the investigators and the community that had just witnessed the unthinkable. Evidence markers were placed beside each casing. Photographs captured the moment forever. The car door, the purse, the pavement where she had fallen. Shawnee eventually emerged from the apartment, still trembling. She told officers what she had seen, what she had heard, and why she had hidden in the bathroom. Her words painted a picture of fear that spread beyond the single act of violence, fear that others in the complex could have been next. Hours passed. Investigators continued their work, piecing together every second of what had happened. The story was already becoming clear. A lie about an insurance card, a confrontation, a desperate attempt to flee, and a young mother executed in her own community. By nightfall, her body had been removed from the scene, but the silence lingered. Neighbors walked cautiously, staring at the stained pavement. Parents held their children tighter. The air felt heavy, carrying with it the knowledge that something irreversible had happened in the span of just a few minutes. The Houston Police Department moved quickly. Within hours, Finley was identified as the primary suspect. His name was broadcast across internal channels, and a bolo, "Be on the lookout," was issued for Merseana's stolen vehicle. Tips began coming in. Community members who knew the couple provided information on where Finley might run. Detectives pieced together his movements, tracing his use of her car, monitoring surveillance cameras from nearby businesses, and cross-referencing phone records where possible. It wasn't long before authorities closed in. On the same day, or within the immediate days following, Finley was located and taken into custody. The arrest was not dramatic. It was procedural. Officers moved in, detained him, and brought him in for questioning. When Nicholas Finley was officially arrested, police announced he would face a capital murder charge. This charge was not incidental. It was the most serious offense possible under Texas law. It reflected both the deliberate act of murder and the theft tied to it. Prosecutors immediately argued that Finley posed a danger to the community and should not be allowed bail. Court records confirmed the severity of the accusations. Finley had not only shot and killed Merseana Struggs, but had also robbed her, fleeing with her purse and car in the aftermath. It was a textbook case for capital murder. The case against Finley was built as much on the voices of those who saw and heard the killing as it was on the physical evidence. Neighbors' accounts placed him at the scene, described his pursuit of Merseana, and confirmed his escape in her car. Shawnee Drury's statement carried particular weight. Her testimony about hiding in the bathroom, hearing the shots, and seeing his behavior before the killing painted a picture of a man who had set out to dominate and destroy. Other residents corroborated the timeline. Merseana running, the locked truck, the fall, the shots that silenced her. Together, their words created an unbroken narrative from the moment she arrived with the insurance card to the instant he fled with her belongings. For investigators and prosecutors, the case was strong. The evidence aligned seamlessly. A clear suspect with a history of conflict with the victim, witnesses who identified him by name, physical evidence in the form of shell casings, theft of the victim's car and purse immediately after the shooting. These elements combined to form a case that prosecutors could present as both deliberate and aggravated. It was not just a killing, it was a killing intertwined with theft, deception, and control. Under Texas law, capital murder applies in cases where murder is committed during the course of another felony, such as robbery. In this case, Finley's theft of Merseana's purse and vehicle, combined with the killing itself, placed him squarely under the statute. The charge carried with it the possibility of the harshest penalties available under state law. While prosecutors had not yet announced whether they would seek the death penalty, the no-bond order made clear their assessment. Finley was considered a threat too dangerous to return to the community. As the legal process began, the broader questions remained. How did it come to this? How had a relationship marked by red flags, financial coercion, and control escalated to murder without intervention? Domestic violence experts pointed to a familiar pattern: escalation. Financial control, demands for money, and the use of intimidation often precede physical violence. In Harris County, as in much of Texas, domestic violence homicides remain a grim reality. Advocates noted that without stronger early interventions, protective orders, monitoring of repeat offenders, and robust support for victims, the cycle often continues unchecked until it reaches its worst conclusion. For Merseana, the warning signs had been present. A boyfriend who pressured her for money, who used her car without restriction, who staged a lie to lure her into isolation. Each of these was a red flag, the kind that experts say must be taken seriously before it becomes lethal. By the end of July 2024, investigators had built their case. Finley was in custody, charged with capital murder, was booked into the Harris County Jail without bond, reflecting both the gravity of the crime and the danger he poses if released. This case is not just about one man's violence. It is about the broader failures that allowed it to unfold. Systems that treat economic control as a private dispute. Courts that fail to enforce the surrender of firearms when protective orders are in place. Domestic violence does not always start with physical violence at first. It often begins with control, of money, of movement, of decisions. It builds slowly until suddenly it feels impossible to leave. If you are in a relationship where your independence is shrinking, where your earnings are demanded, where your choices no longer feel like your own, please recognize that these are not inconveniences. They are red flags. And if you are watching this and you have survived, your story matters. Your knowledge, the signs you noticed, the steps you took, the ways you got out, can save lives. Share them in the comments. Someone may read your words and recognize themselves before it is too late. I invite you to subscribe to True Crime Red Flag. By subscribing, you gain more than just access to content. You gain information that could save a life, maybe your own or that of someone you love. And by commenting, by sharing, by keeping the conversation going, you become part of a community that refuses to look away.